Jake Gardner owned the Hive Bar in Omaha, Nebraska, and he killed James Scurlock on May 30th. James Scurlock was part of a group of Black Lives Matter supporters that were gathered outside of his bar. They had smashed a window at his bar and were beginning to attack Jake's father. So Jake ran over to try and defuse the situation. He was unsuccessful in defusing it. In fact, they turned on him. In fact, this guy who he ended up shooting put his arm around Jake's throat to try and choke him, and it was a threat to his life. When that happened, Jake shot warning shots. He was trying to warn them all to back off and go away because he didn't actually want to shoot any of these people. That didn't work, and so he fatally shot James. Now, it was a pretty clear-cut case of self-defense. The DA thought so too. The DA thought that he shouldn't be charged. He referred to it as justifiable homicide. Black Lives Matter, though, they decided to launch a big smear campaign against Jake and at the same time harass the DA into doing something. They basically, did everything they could to put maximum pressure on this DA, and the DA caved. Because of that pressure, Jake was charged with manslaughter, attempted first-degree assault, terroristic threats, and using a weapon while committing a felony. The terroristic threats charge was because of the warning shot, was because he shot to try not to kill anybody. A lot of people say that you should never fire warning shots at all, that if you're in fear for your life, you should shoot the person who's making you fear for your life. You should just forego the warning shots altogether. But Jake so badly didn't want to hurt any of these people, didn't want to kill any of these people, that he did that, and then the DA charged him extra for having given that warning. I mean, seriously, that's just wrong. It's so very wrong. And Jake was defending himself and his father. I mean, seriously, it is a very clear cut of self-defense, and the DA saw video on this. Remember, the DA decided that this was self-defense and he did not need to charge Jake. Then changed his mind because he was caving to the mob. It's just a perversion of justice altogether. And then Jake was kind of tried by media too. The local and to some degree the national media tried to smear Jake, like they do. Especially like they do with any white guy who uses a firearm in self-defense. They act like that guy is just the worst person around. Well, now, apparently, Jake has committed suicide. But the facts of the supposed suicide don't really make sense. Jake's body was found outside of a healthcare clinic in Hillsboro, Oregon, roughly 20 minutes from Portland, Oregon, where he was staying with his uncle. Now, who goes outside of a healthcare clinic to commit suicide? Generally, you avoid the places that could save your life if you're trying to take your life. You'd go as far away from the medical help as possible, and yet he was outside of a medical clinic? Moreover, he had hired a bodyguard shortly before this because he'd gotten so many death threats from Black Lives Matter and Antifa and so on. The groups. So the person who hires a bodyguard because he's concerned about his personal safety is a person who committed suicide? It really just doesn't make sense. All we know from the supposed suicide is that there was a 911 call of a suicidal person, and when police showed up, Jake's body was there. We don't know how he supposedly killed himself. No details have been released whatsoever, which itself is kind of odd. It just seems kind of Clinton-style suicide. You get me, right? Now, Jake's lawyer, Stu Dornan, said, and I quote, "He was deathly afraid of coming back here because he didn't feel like he could get a fair trial. And who would blame him?" unquote. And that's fair, although apparently he was, in fact, planning on coming back now that he had the lawyer and so on. But he was afraid of not getting a fair trial. And who wouldn't be? You're talking about a district attorney who, decided to go ahead and indict and get a grand jury and so on because of political pressure. I mean, that's like the epitome of an unfair trial at that point. And it's not just that one DA. Take the Nebraska state senator, Megan Hunt, who said, quote, The indictment of Jake Gardner would never have happened without the community, the people who stood up for justice and demanded action from city officials. Jake Gardner is gone, but the white supremacist attitudes that emboldened him are still with us today, unquote. You think he'd get a fair trial in that environment with these political officials? I mean, what she's describing is what they call mob rule in other countries. Right? That's not a fair trial. That's not a trial at all. And what kind of white supremacist attitudes is Jake supposed to have had? I mean, self-defense, he defended himself. Is that white supremacy manifested? Or how about his expectation of due process, of a fair trial? I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any indication of white supremacy, but the mob did seek evidence thereof. And what they found was that in 2016, when he was a libertarian, Gardner posted on Facebook that trans women, in other words, men who claim to be women, shouldn't use the women's bathroom at his establishment unless they've had their appendage removed and their identification legally changed. In other words, if they're still a threat to women, they shouldn't be in the women's bathroom. That was his overall point, and that seems like fairly, decent to me. Moreover, he apparently volunteered for Trump's campaign. The horror! So now people are celebrating Jake's death, which, as I said, doesn't really sound like any suicide I've really heard about. But they're going to celebrate now because the mob has had a victory in Jake's death. It's horrendous. Everyone ought to be talking about this and ought to be outraged by this, instead of having major public figures, Democrat public figures, who are celebrating this injustice. It's horrendous. Wait, if you enjoyed that video, please remember to like and share. I can't grow without you. Also, if you want to be reliably notified of new videos, don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter. If you're able to support the production of these videos, I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe at Subscribestar, or maybe get one of the healthier products, or even get some merch.